You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you, Rachel said at Jake's graduation celebration. I just smiled. I was waiting for this moment. I signaled to the event coordinator and a presentation began on the projector screen. I watched the woman's face go pale when she saw what was coming. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I've been divorced once, built my own business from scratch, and raised one son while managing multiple real estate properties. At 45, I thought I understood how people could manipulate situations for their own benefit. I was wrong. The community center's main hall buzzed with the warm energy that only local graduation celebrations can bring. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the cheerful chatter of congratulatory conversations filled the practical space decorated with handmade banners and balloons. My son's girlfriend, Jake, his associate degree certificate fresh in his hand, sat at our reserved table near the front, glowing with the quiet confidence of a young man who'd just taken his first real step toward independence. Community college, academic scholarship. The pride swelling in my chest felt like it might burst through my ribs. Marie, did you see how Professor Chen smiled when I walked across that stage? Jake leaned toward me, his eyes sparkling with excitement. I think she was genuinely proud. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, feeling the calluses he'd earned from weekend construction work to help with expenses. You've always been determined, sweetheart. You've earned every bit of this success. That's when the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. Oh, please. The voice sliced through our moment like ice water. Let's not act like this is some incredible achievement. All heads turned toward Rachel, Chris's girlfriend, who sat stiffly in her chair with that particular expression she wore when she planned to make her point crystal clear. Her perfectly polished nails drummed against her phone case as she stared directly at me. Rachel, Chris warned quietly, but she was already beyond caring about social niceties. She stood slowly, deliberately, her carefully chosen outfit catching the fluorescent lighting as she turned to face me. The conversations at nearby tables began to quiet as people sensed the tension building in our corner of the room. You want to know what I really think about this whole performance? Her voice carried just enough to reach the families at adjacent tables, people from our neighborhood who knew us all by name. This woman, she pointed directly at me, has been playing the supportive business mentor role for months. But the truth is she's nothing but a social climber who doesn't understand her place. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression calm. I'd learned in business never to let competitors see you rattled. Rachel, stop. Chris's voice carried a note of embarrassment I'd heard too often lately. But Rachel was just getting started. She took a step closer to my chair, her voice rising with each word. You want to know what your precious Marie really is, Jake? She's a fraud. A middle-aged woman trying to buy her way into respectability because she can't accept that some of us actually earned our education. I glanced down at my simple but professional dress, appropriate for the occasion, but I knew this wasn't really about my appearance. You embarrass me, Rachel continued, her voice now reaching half the room. Every single time we're together in public, I have to pretend that you're not completely out of your depth. You try to give advice about things you don't understand. You act like owning a few rental properties makes you some kind of business expert. And you have no idea how to conduct yourself around people who actually matter in education. The silence that followed felt heavy. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on our table. Could practically hear the whispered conversations that would spread through our community for weeks to come. Jake's face had gone pale. Rachel, that's enough. No, it's not enough. She turned back to me and I saw something in her eyes that went beyond mere dislike. It was contempt, cold and calculated. I have tolerated the embarrassment of being associated with you for 2 years. 2 years of making excuses, of trying to minimize the damage your presence causes just by being in our social circle. She leaned down closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than her shouting. You disgust me, Marie. I look at you and I feel sick that you're supposed to be part of Chris's life. The words hit me like physical blows. But something unexpected happened in that moment. Instead of the shame and hurt I might have expected to feel, a strange calm settled over me. A peaceful, almost satisfied calm. I smiled. It wasn't a dramatic smile. Nothing obvious or theatrical. Just a small, knowing curve of my lips that seemed to confuse Rachel more than any tears or arguments might have. I reached into my purse with steady hands and pulled out my phone. With deliberate movements, I caught the eye of Janet. the event coordinator, and gave her a subtle nod. "What are you doing?" Rachel demanded, some of her confidence wavering as she noticed my composure. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as Janet moved to the presentation equipment near the small stage, where the community college staff managed the event's audio-visual system. The soft background music that had been playing faded out, replaced by the distinctive sound of a video beginning to play. The large projection screen mounted on the far wall, usually displaying the college's achievement photos, flickered to life with a different image entirely. Rachel turned toward the screen, and I watched the color drain from her face like water flowing down a drain. "No," she whispered. But yes, there she was, crystal clear in high definition, sitting in what was clearly a family court mediation room. The timestamp showed a date from just 8 months ago. "So, you want to completely terminate your parental obligations?" The mediator's voice came through the room's sound system with perfect clarity. "Completely," Rachel replied on screen. "I don't want her to have any legal right to contact or support. As far as I'm concerned, I never had a daughter." The blood left Rachel's face so quickly, I thought she might collapse right there. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. "What is this?" Chris's voice was barely above a whisper. On screen, the conversation continued. "And you understand that this means she'll have no family support system, no financial assistance for her education." "Good," Rachel's recorded voice replied with chilling detachment. "Maybe that will finally teach her that choices have consequences." That's when Rachel's knees gave out entirely. She collapsed into her chair with such force that it scraped against the floor, and then she simply folded forward onto the table unconscious. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, but I remained perfectly still, watching the video continue to play, watching my son's girlfriend's deepest secret broadcast to everyone who mattered in her carefully constructed community image. I had been waiting for this moment for exactly 5 months, 1 week, and 4 days. Ever since the private investigator I'd hired delivered that recording to my home office, along with a digital folder full of other materials that had made my hands shake with rage. Tonight, finally, everyone would know what Rachel really was. 5 months earlier, I was reviewing property investment reports in my home office when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but in my line of work, unexpected visitors usually meant either a potential client or a neighbor wanting to discuss property values. The woman at my door looked exactly like what I'd expected a modern private investigator would look like. Lisa Chen was in her early 40s, wearing a sharp business suit and carrying a sleek tablet case that suggested she'd embraced digital technology completely. Her handshake was confident and professional, and her eyes held the sharp focus that comes from years of uncovering hidden truths. "Ms. Davidson," her voice was crisp, businesslike, "I believe you're expecting me." I had hired her 4 weeks earlier after a conversation with my neighbor Patricia that had planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't ignore. She'd mentioned seeing Rachel at the family court building downtown, which seemed odd since Rachel had never mentioned any legal matters involving her past. Patricia's daughter worked as a clerk there. She said it looked like family mediation. "Please come in." I led her to my home office, the same desk where I'd made the call to hire her, my fingers steady as I typed her contact information into my phone. Lisa opened her tablet case on my desk with practiced efficiency. "I have to tell you, Ms. Davidson, what I discovered was more extensive than what you originally asked me to investigate." My chest tightened. I'd asked her to look into why Rachel might be visiting family court. I hadn't prepared myself for extensive. "Before I show you anything," she continued, pulling up files on her tablet, "I need you to understand that once you see this, you can't unsee it. Sometimes not knowing really is easier." I looked at the tablet screen, then back at her focused expression. "Miss Chen, I've built a successful business from nothing, survived a difficult divorce, and raised a son largely on my own. I've learned that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always better than living with a beautiful lie." She nodded slowly and opened the first file. The document was a family court petition dated 2 years earlier. As I read the header, my vision actually blurred for a moment. "Petition for termination of parental support obligations. Voluntary relinquishment. She has another daughter," Lisa said quietly. "Sophia Martinez. She's 24 now." My hands started trembling before I'd finished reading the first paragraph. Rachel had voluntarily terminated her parental support obligations to a daughter from a previous relationship. Not because she was young and unprepared. Not because of financial hardship. The petition clearly stated she was terminating her obligations because she was moving forward with a new life path and wished to avoid complications. "There's more," Lisa said, and I wasn't sure I could handle more. The next document was a report from a social worker. Sophia had been 15 when Rachel abandoned her responsibilities, left in the care of an elderly grandmother who passed away just 3 years later. The young woman had struggled through her final years of high school with no family support, no college fund, no safety net of any kind. "Where is she now?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Working night shifts at a hospital while attending nursing school. She's been completely self-sufficient since she was 18. I stared at the photo Lisa showed me on her tablet. Sophia had Jake's determined expression, the same focused intensity that came from Chris's side of the family. She had Rachel's delicate features, but there was something in her eyes that was entirely her own, a resilience, a strength that spoke of someone who'd learned too young that the world required you to fight for everything you got. "She doesn't know about your family," Lisa continued. "As far as Sophia is concerned, her mother disappeared from her life and never looked back. She has no idea that Rachel moved on and built the life that Sophia never got to experience." The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to process what I was learning. "How did you find all this?" "Digital records, mostly. Court documents are accessible if you know where to look. I also contacted some people who knew them before Rachel left their city." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Ms. Davidson, there's something else you need to know about why she left." I wasn't sure I could take another revelation, but I nodded for her to continue. Sophia was getting older, more independent, starting to ask questions about her father, wanting to understand more about her mother's plans for their future. According to former neighbors, Rachel seemed to view Sophia as a burden rather than a daughter, someone who might interfere with her goals to start fresh, somewhere else. The words hit me like physical blows. I thought about Jake, about how much attention and support Rachel showed him in public. Had that all been performance? Was she capable of genuinely caring about any young person? Or was Jake just useful enough to her image to be worth the effort? "There's video," Lisa said quietly. "Video?" "I was able to obtain footage from the family court's security cameras. Your son's girlfriend was very explicit about her intentions and her feelings towards Sophia during her mediation session. That's when she handed me the USB drive that would change everything. I watched it that night alone in my home office with the blinds drawn and the door locked. Watching Rachel sit in that family courtroom and speak about her own daughter with such cold detachment made me physically ill. She talked about Sophia like she was discarding an unwanted responsibility. But it was more than just the abandonment that horrified me. It was the calculation behind it. Rachel had researched the legal process thoroughly. She'd made sure there would be no way for Sophia to contact her in the future. No way for her past to interfere with her new life with Chris and Jake. She had erased her own daughter with the same casual efficiency that someone might delete old files from a computer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sophia working night shifts, putting herself through nursing school with no family support. I thought about Jake, the young man Rachel doted on so publicly, and wondered what would happen if he ever became inconvenient to her plans. But mostly I thought about my son, Chris, who had no idea he was in a relationship with a woman capable of abandoning her own child. I knew I had to do something. But what? How do you tell your son that his girlfriend is not who she pretends to be? How do you explain that the woman he cares about discarded her own daughter like unwanted baggage? More importantly, how do you make sure it never happens again? That's when I started planning. I hired Lisa to find Sophia, to learn everything she could about her current situation. I discovered she was struggling but determined, working as a hospital night shift aide and weekend tutoring to pay for her nursing program. She lived in a small shared apartment that cost most of her income, but she was making it work through sheer determination and intelligence. I also had Lisa continue monitoring Rachel's activities. I wanted to know if there were other secrets, other victims of her particular brand of cold calculation. What she found was a pattern that made my blood run cold. Rachel had done this before, not abandoned children. Sophia was her only child before Chris. But she had systematically cut herself off from anyone who knew her past, anyone who might contradict the image she wanted to project. Former friends, distant relatives, even her own mother, all discarded without explanation once they were no longer useful to her carefully constructed persona. My son's girlfriend was not just selfish or self-centered. She was a predator who specialized in emotional manipulation, and my family was her current target. I spent weeks agonizing over what to do with this information. Should I tell Chris immediately? Should I contact Sophia? Should I confront Rachel directly? But then I remembered something my business mentor used to say. The best way to expose a fraud is to let them keep talking. So I waited, I watched, I documented, and I started planning for the day when Rachel would finally reveal her true nature to everyone who mattered. I didn't have to wait long. The video continued playing as Rachel lay unconscious, her head resting on the white tablecloth like she'd simply decided to take a nap in the middle of her own destruction. The event staff had moved quickly to help with nearby tables, but not quickly enough to prevent half the community center from witnessing my son's girlfriend's most carefully guarded secret. On screen, Rachel's voice continued with that same cold detachment I'd heard when Lisa first played this recording for me. I don't want her to be able to find me ever. As far as the world is concerned, Sophia Martinez is not my daughter. Chris sat frozen in his chair, staring at the screen like he was watching a foreign film without subtitles. His face had gone through several color changes in the past few minutes, from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. Marie? Jake's voice was small, uncertain. Who is Sophia Martinez? Before Chris could answer, Rachel's eyes fluttered open. She lifted her head slowly, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, looking around the room like she couldn't quite remember where she was. Then her gaze landed on the projection screen, and reality crashed back into her face like a physical blow. "Turn it off," she whispered, then louder, more frantic. "Turn it off!" She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly and lunged toward the presentation controls. But Janet, the event coordinator, stepped smoothly between her and the equipment. She looked to me and I gave her the slightest shake of my head. "Please," Rachel turned to face our table. Her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her carefully chosen outfit wrinkled from her collapse. "This is all taken out of context. You don't understand? Then explain it to us." My voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd had months to prepare for this moment. "Who is Sophia Martinez, Rachel?" The question hung in the air like smoke around us. I could feel the weight of dozens of conversations that had stopped mid-sentence. The electricity of community drama that would be discussed in living rooms across our neighborhood for months to come. "She's..." Rachel's voice cracked. She looked desperately at Chris, searching his face for some sign that he might still be on her side. "She's my daughter from before I met you." "Your daughter?" Chris's voice was flat, emotionless. "You have a daughter?" "Had," Rachel corrected quickly. "I had a daughter. It was a long time ago before we got together. It was complicated, Chris. You don't understand what my life was like then." On screen, the mediator's voice continued the conversation we were all hearing for the first time. "And you're certain you want to include the clause preventing any future contact? This is quite permanent, Ms. Martinez." "Completely certain," Rachel's recorded voice replied. "I want a clean slate. No complications from my past." Jake pushed his chair back from the table. "How old was she when you did this?" Rachel's eyes darted between Jake and Chris. "She was 15, but you have to understand 15. The word exploded from Chris like he'd been punched in the stomach. "You abandoned a 15-year-old? "I didn't abandon her." Rachel's voice rose defensively. "She had her grandmother. She had a support system. I just couldn't handle being a mother at that point in my life." I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of someone observing a carefully planned business presentation. For months, I'd wondered how Rachel would explain herself when confronted with the truth. I'd imagined various scenarios, different excuses she might use. I hadn't expected her to be quite this unprepared. "But you could handle being involved with me." Jake's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. What made me different? The question clearly caught Rachel off guard. She opened and closed her mouth several times before managing. "That's different." "You're different." "How?" "You just are." Her voice was getting higher, more desperate. "Jake, you have to understand. I was young when I had Sophia. I wasn't ready. But when I met Chris, when I got involved with your family, I was in a completely different place in my life. I decided it was time to speak up. Actually, Rachel, according to the court documents, you were 26 when you signed away your rights to Sophia. Hardly a child yourself." The silence that followed my words was so complete. I could hear the kitchen staff cleaning up in the back of the center. Chris turned to look at me for the first time since the video began. "You knew about this?" "I found out 5 months ago." I met his gaze steadily. I hired a private investigator after I saw Rachel coming out of the family court building downtown. I wanted to know what she was hiding. You had me investigated? Rachel's voice pitched higher. You violated my privacy. You had no right? I had every right. My voice cut through her protests like a blade. You're in a relationship with my son. You became part of my family, and something about you never felt authentic. The video on screen was reaching its conclusion, but the mediator's final question hung in the air like a judgment. And what should we do if Sofia Martinez ever tries to contact you in the future? Rachel's recorded voice was crystal clear in her response. Tell her I moved away and left no forwarding address. The gasp that went up from the nearby tables was audible. Even some of the event staff stopped what they were doing to stare at our table. Jake's face had gone completely pale. You wanted her to think you just disappeared? It was kinda that way, Rachel said desperately. Don't you see? It was better for her to have a clean break, to be able to move on without wondering why I left. This way, she could focus on her own life instead of spending her energy hoping I'd come back. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, Chris said quietly. Selfish? Rachel whirled on him. I was trying to protect her. I was trying to do what was best for everyone. No, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria with quiet authority. You were trying to protect yourself. You wanted to start fresh with Chris and Jake, and Sofia was an inconvenience. That's not true. Then where is she now? Rachel! I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen where I'd pulled up a recent photo Lisa had taken of Sofia leaving her night job. Where is this daughter you were supposedly protecting? Rachel stared at the photo, and for a moment, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across her face. Sofia looked tired in the picture, wearing hospital scrubs, walking to her car in a parking lot at 300 in the morning. Rachel's voice faltered. She's working night shifts to put herself through nursing school, I continued. She lives in a shared apartment that costs most of her income. She has no family, no support system, no safety net of any kind because her mother decided she was an inconvenience. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. On the screen, the video had finally ended, replaced by the community center's usual announcements, as if nothing had happened. Chris stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, like someone who wasn't sure his legs would support him. I need to leave. Chris, wait! Rachel reached for his arm, but he stepped away from her touch. Don't, he said quietly. Just don't. He turned to Jake. Are you coming with me? Jake looked between his family and Rachel, confusion and hurt warring across his young face. Finally, he nodded and stood up. This isn't over, Rachel said, her voice taking on a hard edge as she watched them preparing to leave her sitting alone. You think you've won something here, Marie? You think destroying my relationship makes you the hero? I gathered my purse and stood to follow my son and Jake. Before I left, I turned back to face her one last time. I didn't destroy your relationship, Rachel. I just made sure Chris knew who he was really involved with. As we walked through the community center toward the exit, I could feel dozens of eyes following our progress. Tomorrow, this story would spread through every social circle that mattered to Rachel. Her carefully constructed image as the perfect educational advocate would be replaced by the truth about who she really was. But as satisfying as that thought was, I knew this was just the beginning. Rachel wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and she still had tactics she hadn't used yet. The real battle was just starting. The first shot in Rachel's counterattack came exactly 48 hours after the community center incident, delivered in the form of a concerned phone call from my daughter Anna, who lived in the next city over. Mom, what's going on? Anna's voice was tight with worry. Rachel called me this morning in tears. She said you've been trying to destroy her relationship with Chris for months. I was in my home office reviewing rental property reports in the early morning quiet when my phone rang. The peace of the morning shattered with my daughter's words, and I sat back in my desk chair. She said, what? She told me you hired someone to spy on her, that you ambushed her at Jake's graduation with some kind of setup. Mom, she was crying. She said you're trying to turn the whole family against her because you've never accepted her relationship with Chris. The careful way Anna spoke told me everything I needed to know. Rachel had gotten to her first, had painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. I could practically hear the script my son's girlfriend had used, probably the same one she was spreading to anyone who would listen. Anna, there's more to this story than what Rachel told you. I know you two have never gotten along perfectly, but Mom, she said you violated her privacy. She said you had her followed. There was a pause, and when Anna spoke again, her voice was smaller. Did you really do that? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of having to defend actions that shouldn't need defending. Yes, I did, but not for the reasons she told you. Then why? How do you explain to your daughter that her brother's girlfriend is a predator? How do you tell her that the woman who's been part of family gatherings for 2 years casually abandoned her own child? She has another daughter, Anna. A daughter she abandoned when the girl was 15 years old. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, what? Her name is Sophia. She's 24 now, working night shifts to put herself through nursing school with no family support. Because Rachel legally severed all ties with her, she made sure Sophia could never contact her again. Another long pause. Are you sure? I have court documents, video recordings, everything. But even as I said it, I could hear the doubt creeping into Anna's voice. Mom, that seems extreme, even for someone you don't like. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding something? And there it was. The seed Rachel had planted was already taking root. My own daughter was questioning my judgment, my motives, my version of events. This was how Rachel operated. I'd learned that much from Lisa's investigation. She didn't just abandon people. She systematically destroyed their credibility first, making sure that when the truth came out, it would be dismissed as the vindictive lies of someone with an agenda. After I hung up with Anna, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the morning light stream through the windows and thinking about strategy. Most people think battles are won with dramatic gestures, big moments of triumph. But Rachel understood something more sophisticated. She knew that the most effective way to win a war was to make your enemy defeat themselves. By the time my neighbor Patricia came by for our usual afternoon coffee, I'd received similar calls from 2 cousins, Chris's sister Michelle, and even Jake's study partner from college. All of them had heard some version of the same story. Poor Rachel, victimized by a controlling business owner who couldn't accept that her son had found happiness. I don't want to take sides, Patricia said carefully as she settled into my kitchen chair with her cup of coffee. But people are talking, Marie, and some of what they're saying, well, it doesn't make you look very good. What exactly are they saying? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. That you've been jealous of Rachel from the beginning. That you resented how happy she made Chris. How perfect their relationship seemed. They're saying you hired that investigator to dig up dirt on her. And when you couldn't find anything really damaging, you took things out of context to make her look bad. Out of context? I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. Patricia, she abandoned her 15-year-old daughter. She legally erased her own child. How is that out of context? Well, Patricia said slowly, according to what I heard, the girl was troubled. Acting out? Getting into drugs, maybe. And Rachel was young and scared and thought the girl would be better off with other family members who could handle her better. I stared at my oldest neighbor, watching her repeat Rachel's lies with the conviction of someone who wanted to believe them. Where did you hear that version? Rachel called me yesterday. She was so upset, Marie. She said she'd been planning to tell Chris about Sophia when the time was right, but you forced her hand by making it public. She said the whole situation was more complicated than it looked. Of course Rachel had called Patricia. She was working her way through my entire support system, rewriting history conversation by conversation. Did she mention that Sophia has been completely on her own since she was 18? That she's working her way through nursing school with no family support? Patricia frowned. She said the girl chose to cut contact with the family. That Sophia was angry about the custody arrangement and refused to maintain relationships. Lies wrapped in just enough plausible detail to sound credible. Rachel had clearly spent the last 2 days crafting a narrative that transformed her from predator to victim, from abandoner to abandoned. The really masterful part was how she'd positioned my investigation as the real betrayal. By focusing on my violation of privacy rather than what that investigation had uncovered, she'd made me the villain in my own story. That evening, Chris called. Mom, we need to talk. His voice was careful, controlled in a way that made my stomach clench. This wasn't the voice of a son calling his mother. This was the voice of someone who'd been convinced he needed to manage a difficult situation. Of course, sweetheart. Do you want to come over for dinner? Actually, I think it would be better if we met somewhere neutral. How about that coffee shop on Market Street tomorrow at 2? Neutral, as if I were some kind of threat that needed to be contained in a public space. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where we could talk privately. Chris walked in exactly at 2, and the way he moved, purposeful, resigned, told me this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd hoped for. He sat down across from me without ordering anything. His hands folded on the table like he was preparing to deliver bad news. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since graduation night. I imagine you have. The thing is, what you did having Rachel investigated, ambushing her in public like that, it wasn't right. No matter what you found out, that wasn't the way to handle it. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And what would have been the right way, Chris? You should have come to me privately. We could have talked about it as a family. Worked through whatever issues you had with my girlfriend. Issues I had, I repeated carefully. Chris, this isn't about me not liking Rachel. This is about her abandoning her own child. According to Rachel, the situation with Sophia was more complicated than what you saw in that video. She said she was trying to do what was best for a troubled teenager, and that you deliberately took her words out of context to make her look as bad as possible. There it was, the rewritten history delivered by my own son with the earnest conviction of someone who desperately wanted to believe it. Did she also tell you that Sophia has been working night shifts to survive? That she has no family support system at all? Chris's jaw tightened. She told me that Sophia chose to cut off contact with the family, that she was angry about the custody situation and refused to accept help. And you believe that? I believe my girlfriend, he said firmly. And frankly, Mom, the fact that you went to such lengths to dig up her past makes me question your motives. I stared at my son, seeing Rachel's handiwork written across his face like graffiti. She'd taken his natural loyalty and twisted it into a weapon against me. My motives? I kept my voice level, but inside I was screaming. Chris, I was trying to protect this family. From what? From a woman who made some difficult decisions as a young mother? From someone who was trying to start fresh and build a better life? From someone who is capable of abandoning her own child when that child becomes inconvenient? You don't know that's what happened. I know exactly what happened. I have the documentation. Documentation that you obtained by violating her privacy and trust. Chris leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. Mom, I need you to understand something. Rachel is my girlfriend. She's been part of Jake's life. And what you did to her was cruel and vindictive. The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the child I'd raised and sacrificed for, was defending the woman who'd erased her own daughter from existence. So what happens now? I asked quietly. Now we all try to move forward. Rachel has agreed to consider family counseling to work through the issues that led to this situation. But she needs to know that she's safe from future attacks. Attacks? She's afraid of you, Mom. She's afraid of what else you might try to do to hurt her. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Rachel afraid of me. The woman who'd systematically destroyed a young woman's life was afraid of a 45-year-old businesswoman who'd simply exposed the truth. And what about Sophia? I asked. Chris's expression softened slightly. If what you say about her situation is true, then maybe we can find a way to help her. But that's something Rachel and I need to decide together as a couple. As a couple? The phrase stung because it made clear exactly where I stood in this new dynamic. I was no longer part of the inner circle. I was now an outsider whose opinion might be consulted, but whose judgment was no longer trusted. As Chris left that coffee shop, I realized that Rachel had won the first round of this war more decisively than I'd imagined possible. She hadn't just survived my revelation. She'd used it to isolate me from my own family. But what she didn't understand was that I'd been fighting battles longer than she'd been alive. And I wasn't nearly finished yet. 2 weeks after my devastating coffee shop conversation with Chris, I was in my kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. It was nearly 700 in the evening, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Since the graduation celebration incident, my social calendar had become notably lighter, as people in my circle tried to navigate the awkward waters of choosing sides in a family drama they didn't fully understand. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a young woman who took my breath away. She had Chris's determined jawline and Rachel's delicate bone structure. But there was something in her expression that was entirely her own, a quiet strength mixed with nervous determination. Miss Davidson. My name is Sophia Martinez. I think we need to talk. My legs nearly gave out. After months of investigating her life from a distance, seeing her standing on my doorstep felt surreal, like a character from a report had stepped into reality. Sophia. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. How did you find me? It wasn't easy. She shifted a worn backpack on her shoulder. But when someone hires a private investigator to look into your life, word eventually gets back to you, especially in a city as connected as ours. Of course, Lisa had been discreet but not invisible. In my focus on gathering information about Sophia, I hadn't considered that she might become aware of the investigation. I know this is strange, she continued, but I drove over here because I had to understand why someone was asking questions about me and what I learned. She paused, her voice catching slightly. What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I stepped aside to let her in, my mind racing. Please come in. Can I get you something to eat? You must be tired from your shift. Coffee would be great if you have it. As I busied myself with making coffee, Sophia stood in my kitchen looking around with curious eyes. She was smaller than I'd expected from Lisa's photos, probably barely 5'4", but there was a presence about her that filled the room. So, you're Rachel's boyfriend's mother, she said finally. I am, and you're her daughter. Apparently, the word came out bitter, though I spent the last 9 years believing she'd just disappeared from my life. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. What? Sophia sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Lisa had first shown me the documents that exposed Rachel's lies. When I turned 18 and aged out of my grandmother's care, I tried to find her. I hired a cheap investigator with money I'd saved from my first job. He came back and told me my mother had moved away and left no forwarding address. The coffee maker gurgled in the silence that followed her words. I felt like I was drowning in the enormity of what she was telling me. He showed me records and everything, Sophia continued. Said he'd tracked down her last known address and found she'd moved away without leaving any contact information. I accepted it, Ms. Davidson. I spent years believing she'd just decided to start over somewhere else without me. But she wasn't gone. No. She was here building a new life with your son and his family while I was working night shifts to pay for nursing school. Sophia's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. Do you know what it's like to find out that your mother not only abandoned you, but was living just a few hours away this whole time? The room spun slightly as the full scope of Rachel's cruelty hit me. It wasn't enough for her to abandon Sophia. She'd had to make sure the young woman could never find her, never disrupt her new life. How did you find out the truth? Your investigator was good, but not perfect. When she started asking questions in my city, it got back to the woman who used to help my grandmother with housework. She remembered me, remembered my situation. She also remembered that my mother had asked her to give misleading information if anyone ever came looking. I sat down heavily across from Sophia, feeling physically sick. She asked someone to lie about where she'd gone. A small favor to make sure her past stayed buried. Sophia's laugh was hollow. Easier than dealing with an inconvenient daughter, I guess. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd gone that far. It's not your fault. Sophia studied my face carefully. But I need to understand why you were investigating me. What does my mother's abandoned daughter have to do with your family? So, I told her everything about the private investigator, about the video, about the confrontation at the community center. I told her about Chris's refusal to believe the truth, about how Rachel had managed to paint herself as the victim in her own story. When I finished, Sophia sat quietly for a long time processing what I'd shared. She has a new family, she said finally. My half-brother. Jake, he's 19, just graduated from community college. And he doesn't know about you. He does now. He was there when the video played. Sophia nodded slowly. What did he say? He was shocked, confused. But Rachel has been working very hard to control the narrative since then. She's convinced most of the family that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. Complicated how? I hesitated, not wanting to repeat Rachel's lies. But Sophia needed to know what she was up against. She's telling people you were troubled, that you had substance abuse issues and were acting out. She's saying she made the difficult decision to let you be raised by family members who could better handle your problems. Sophia's coffee cup hit the table with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. Substance abuse? Acting out? Her voice rose with indignation. Miss Davidson, I was 15 years old and my mother disappeared from my life without explanation. My grandmother was 80 and had diabetes so complicated she could barely take care of herself. I was maintaining a 3.8 GPA and working a part-time job to help pay for groceries. I know. I've seen your school records? Then you know she's lying. I do. But unfortunately my family seems more inclined to believe her version. Sophia stood up and walked to my kitchen window, staring out at the garden where I'd been working when Anna called to tell me about Rachel's damage control campaign. I want to meet them, she said finally. Who? My half-brother, your son. I want them to hear the truth from me directly. My stomach clenched with worry. Sophia, I don't think that's a good idea. Rachel has had weeks to prepare them for something like this. She'll have an explanation ready. Then I guess we'll see how convincing her explanations are when I'm standing right there to contradict them. There was something in Sophia's voice that reminded me of myself at her age. A quiet determination that wouldn't be swayed by other people's comfort or convenience. What do you want from this? I asked gently. What are you hoping to accomplish? Sophia turned back to face me, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. I want my half-brother to know that I exist. I want him to know that our mother is capable of erasing her own children when they become inconvenient. And I want to make sure it never happens to him. The weight of her words settled over the kitchen like dust after an explosion. Sophia wasn't here for revenge or money, or even necessarily for reconciliation. She was here to protect a brother she'd never met from a mother who'd already proven she was capable of the unthinkable. There's a family barbecue this Saturday, I said slowly, at Chris and Rachel's townhouse. It's supposed to be a healing gathering to bring everyone together after the community centre incident. Will you take me? I thought about Chris's anger, about Rachel's carefully constructed victim narrative, about the way my own family had turned against me in the space of a few weeks. Yes, I said, I'll take you. Because sometimes the only way to fight a lie is to drag the truth into the same room and let them battle it out face to face. The next Saturday arrived overcast and humid, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavy and uncertain. Sophia had driven over again, this time with a small overnight bag, prepared to stay through the weekend if necessary. We sat in my car outside Chris's townhouse for several minutes, watching through the windows as my family moved around inside, preparing for their healing gathering. Are you ready for this? I asked Sophia. She smoothed down her simple navy dress, the kind of outfit someone wears when they want to look professional, but can't afford anything expensive. No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so we might as well get it over with. I knocked on the front door instead of using my key, a small acknowledgement that my status in this house had changed. When Chris opened the door, his face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, and finally a carefully controlled neutrality. Mom, I wasn't sure you were coming. I brought someone I'd like you to meet, I said, stepping aside so he could see Sophia clearly. Chris's eyes widened as he took in her familiar features. Even someone determined to disbelieve the truth couldn't miss the family resemblance. This is Sophia Martinez, I said clearly, Rachel's daughter. For a moment, Chris just stood there, mouth slightly open, staring at the young woman on his doorstep, who shared Jake's determined expression and Rachel's delicate features. Hello, Sophia said simply. I've been looking forward to meeting you. From somewhere behind Chris, I heard a glass shatter against the kitchen floor, followed by Rachel's voice calling out in false cheerfulness. Chris, who's at the door? I think, Sophia said quietly, it's time for a real family meeting. The moment Sophia stepped into Chris's living room, the carefully orchestrated healing gathering transformed into something else entirely. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, as relatives who'd been debating my version of events for weeks found themselves face-to-face with living proof of Rachel's deception. Rachel stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel still in her hands from cleaning up whatever she'd dropped when she heard Sophia's name. Her face had gone completely white, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely scared. Sophia. Jake's voice came from the couch where he'd been sitting with his study partner, Kevin. He stood up slowly, studying the young woman beside me with obvious fascination. You're my sister? Half-sister, Sophia corrected gently. But yes, the resemblance between them was unmistakable now that they were in the same room. Both had inherited Chris's determined jawline and expressive eyes, though Sophia's were more intense from years of careful focus on survival. I don't understand, Chris said, his voice strained. Sophia, if you're really Rachel's daughter, why didn't you contact us before now? Sophia's laugh was soft but bitter. Because until 2 weeks ago, I thought my mother had just moved away and started over without me. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Around the room, family members who'd spent weeks choosing sides found themselves recalibrating everything they thought they knew. That's not possible, Rachel finally managed, her voice high and thin. Sophia, sweetheart, you know that's not true. You were angry when I had to make some difficult decisions, and you chose to cut contact with me. No, Sophia said firmly, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was 15 years old when you signed papers terminating your parental support obligations. I was 18 when I aged out of my grandmother's care with no family support. And I was 20 when I hired an investigator to find you. Only to be told you'd moved away without leaving any forwarding address. She pulled a folder from her backpack and handed it to Chris. These are copies of all the documents, the court papers you signed, the false information someone provided to the investigator I hired, even records showing payments made to ensure that story would hold up if anyone came looking. Chris's hand shook as he opened the folder. I watched his face change as he read through the evidence of his girlfriend's systematic deception. You paid someone to hide where you'd gone? His voice was barely above a whisper. Chris, you have to understand, Rachel said desperately, moving toward him with her hands outstretched. The situation was complicated. I was maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Sophia interrupted, her voice cutting through Rachel's fabrication like a knife. I was working a part-time job to help my elderly grandmother pay for groceries. The only thing I was going through was trying to understand why my mother disappeared from my life without explanation. She turned to address the room, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. I want everyone here to understand something. I didn't come here for money or revenge or to break up anyone's relationship. I came here because I discovered that my mother, who I thought had just moved on without me, has been living a completely different life while I struggled to survive on my own. Jake stepped closer to her, his young face serious with the weight of understanding. What has your life been like since she left? Sophia met his eyes steadily. I've worked night shifts for the past 6 years to put myself through nursing school. I live in a shared apartment that costs most of my income. I've had no family support, no safety net, no one to call when things got difficult. She paused, her voice softening. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. Oh, sweetheart. My sister-in-law Michelle spoke up from across the room, her voice full of genuine sympathy. We had no idea. Because you were never meant to know, Sophia replied. My mother made sure of that. Rachel was backing toward the kitchen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. You don't understand, she kept repeating. None of you understand how complicated the situation was. Then explain it to us, Chris said, his voice hard. Explain how abandoning a 15-year-old and then hiding your whereabouts was the right thing to do. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. Rachel's facade finally cracked completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. I had a new life, a new relationship. I couldn't have my past following me around, complicating things. The honesty of that statement hit the room like a physical blow. Several people actually stepped back as if Rachel's words were contaminated. So you just erased her, Jake said quietly. You erased your own daughter. I did what I had to do. Rachel's voice was rising to a near shriek. You think it was easy? You think I wanted to give up my child? But I had to choose between my past and my future. And I chose my future. You chose yourself, Sophia said with devastating simplicity. You chose your own comfort over your child's well-being. Chris set the folder down on the coffee table and looked at his girlfriend with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but complete recognition of who she really was. Get out, he said quietly. Chris, please. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Get away from my family. Your family? Rachel's voice turned vicious. Half of everything in this townhouse is mine. Half of our shared expenses, half of our future plans. You can't just throw me out. Actually, Chris said with grim satisfaction, I can. We're not married, Rachel. You have no legal claim to anything here. And what you did to Sophia shows me exactly who you really are. Rachel's face went pale. You wouldn't. Abandoning your child and then hiding from her to protect your new life seems like exactly the kind of behavior that shows someone's true character. Chris continued. I'll help you pack your things, but I want you gone by tonight. I watched Rachel look around the room searching for even one sympathetic face. She found none. Even the relatives who'd been most willing to give her the benefit of the doubt were now staring at her with undisguised revulsion. You'll regret this, she said finally, her voice low and dangerous. All of you, you have no idea what you're throwing away. A liar and a child abandoner. Sophia spoke up. I think we'll manage. After Rachel left, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, the family spent the rest of the evening getting to know Sophia. She told them about her life in the city, about her job as a hospital night shift aide, and her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse. She showed them pictures of the small apartment she was so proud of, the first place that had ever truly belonged to her. But what struck me most was how naturally she fit into our family dynamic. She had Chris's practical approach to problems and his dry sense of humor. She shared Jake's love of learning and his quiet intensity when discussing things that mattered to her. Watching Jake and his half-sister discover their connection was like watching two pieces of a puzzle finally click into place. "I can't believe I have a sister," Jake said at one point, shaking his head in wonder. "Half-sister," Sophia corrected again, but she was smiling. "Sister," he insisted. "The half part is just biology. Sisters are about choice." 8 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Sunday dinner for a larger crowd than I'd cooked for in years. Sophia had transferred to a nursing program closer to us, and Chris was helping her with tuition and living expenses. Jake had convinced her to move into the spare room in his apartment, claiming he needed a study partner for his upcoming transfer to a 4-year university. Rachel had disappeared from our lives as thoroughly as she'd once disappeared from Sophia's, leaving behind only the memories of the damage she'd tried to inflict. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in my relationship with my family. The crisis had stripped away all the polite pretenses and careful social maneuvering that had characterized our interactions for years. We were closer now, more honest with each other, more willing to have difficult conversations. "Marie," Sophia appeared in my kitchen doorway holding a bottle of wine. "Chris sent me to ask if you need help with anything." I smiled at how naturally she'd started calling me by my first name, a designation that acknowledged her place in our family structure while respecting the relationship she'd built with my son and Jake. "I think we're almost ready," I said, checking the roast in the oven. "How are you settling in at the new school?" "Better than I expected," she leaned against the counter, relaxed in a way I'd never seen during those first tense meetings. "It's strange having people who care about whether I succeed or fail. I'm still getting used to it. Good strange or bad strange?" "Definitely good," she paused, then added quietly. "Thank you for everything, for investigating, for confronting her, for bringing me into this family." I know it wasn't easy. I studied her face, seeing not just the young woman she'd become, but glimpses of the frightened 15-year-old who'd been abandoned, the determined 18-year-old who'd aged out of her grandmother's care, the hopeful 20-year-old who'd searched for a mother who was hiding from her. "You did the hard part," I told her. "You survived. You built a life for yourself with no help from anyone. All I did was make sure the truth came to light. All you did," Sophia repeated with a smile, "was save me from spending the rest of my life believing I wasn't worth loving." From the dining room, I could hear Chris and Jake debating something with the passionate intensity that seemed to run in our family. The sound of their voices, now joined by Sophia's laugh, filled my house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Rachel had tried to erase Sophia from existence to protect her perfect life from the inconvenience of her past choices. But in the end, her cruelty had only brought our family closer together. Sophia wasn't a liability to be hidden. She was the missing piece we'd never known we needed. As we sat down to dinner that Sunday, I looked around the table at my son, Jake, and the young woman I'd gained through tragedy and truth. This wasn't the family Rachel had tried to build through lies and manipulation. This was better. This was real.